Terrence.
Darren, how's it going?
Good. Can you hear me? We're good to
I
go.
can.
Sick. Well, how are you, dude? Sorry it took me forever to get to you.
Oh, that's all right. It's been a pretty quiet day, so I'm not too worried about that.
Perfect. Cool. Well, I wanted to get you on today to answer this question just because I thought maybe this could give some benefit to other people that have reached out about it that I haven't gotten back to. I think it'd be good for us to kind of just talk through it.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's a good open conversation and, share some good ideas and kind of hopefully someone else can take something away from this podcast too.
Yeah, 100%. So for the people that don't know who you are, tell them just like a quick 30-second intro about who you are, other than that you're jacked. We already know that.
Yeah. Thanks, Darren. So my name is Terrence Limbert. I'm up in Canada, Vernon, British Columbia on the west coast here. I own Forge Valley Fitness. Primarily, we're a functional training gym. And we also train youth, and I tend to train quite a few athletes in various sports. It can be rugby, football, hockey, lacrosse, volleyball, a lot of alpine ski as well. And just recently, or a couple years ago, met Darren here down in Texas. We both did our Power Athlete Block 1 certification, which if you don't know what that is, you should definitely head over to Power Athlete and get to know what that means, because I honestly think it's hands down one of the best coaching experiences and certifications you can get.
Perfect. That kind of dials them in. So up in Canada, real quick, how's everything going with, I know Canada, the COVID thing's been a little bit different even in the US.
Oh man, it's been honestly a bit of a nightmare. We just came out of another gym shutdown.
Oh no.
Gyms were, they gave us the word on December 21st that gyms were going to be closed from December 23rd to January 18th. So that was a real great Christmas present.
Wow. Yeah, that's
so yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. There's actually quite a big movement right now going on with this whole kind of called Free BC thing, and a unity and freedom movement to be like, the people don't want these mandates and closures. You got to just let us live. So otherwise it's been all right. It's been a chilly winter, but it's good.
Yeah, no more mountain biking.
No more mountain biking. Yeah, all the snow on the trails right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that's unfortunate, but hopefully that movement can get things started to move in the right direction up there. So off the top of your head, I can go back and read it as well. Can you kind of summarize that question that you sent over to me?
Yeah. So Darren had a story, and this is kind of why it came to my mind. Darren had a story of one of his athletes doing a really good short sprint interval on an air runner, and form looked absolutely dialed in. Really good pull, weight through the forefront of the foot, pulling through those hamstrings, and most importantly on this topic conversation, elbows locked in 90 degrees, super rigid torso. I just recently gained a couple of clients of a current client. Her daughter and her boyfriend are 100 meter and 200 meter sprinters, and just started training with them probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And overall, they're loving it so far. And one of the things that I can see falling apart for them is form and running, and kind of talking to them a little bit, trying to better understand what really good sprint technique is. I'm not a sprinter by trade, but I definitely know a lot of stuff. And right away, could see one of the habits was both of them, the male in particular, really had a habit of extending his elbow when it went into extension, going to a straight arm. And I cued him, elbow 90 degrees, and immediately he's like, "You know what you're talking about." I'm like, "Thank you, I appreciate that." And I'm like, I don't know if it's a super big deal in sprinting, in your sport. And I kind of was looking around and like, I want to see some pictures of these, elite level runners. And I'm still seeing some of those same faults come along, where the elbow is not staying 90 degrees. It's getting a bit floppy. And I reached out to Darren to kind of ask his point of view on that, and maybe some better experience in terms of different sport translation, training, etc., and to kind of open the conversation about that.
Yeah, awesome. That was a great summary. So, just for listeners, like coming from the same background, probably in the last year and a half is where myself and my other been diving into the sprint mechanics, speed, that side of the coin, because we were really comfortable with the strength work that we're doing, really comfortable in like our philosophy. But I started to realize there was kind of a big gap in like what I knew, my background, and kind of putting together a total package of an athlete. So the last year and a half, I've been spending a lot of time, resources, money on getting education through that. And so obviously this will, as we talk through this, I would still consider myself somewhat of a amateur novice in terms of coaching actual sprinters and speed. I wanted to kind of weigh in on, listen to it, and kind of what I've found over time. So I think what's important is we put some context into this, right? Because you're talking about, so basically we're going to talk about the difference between sprinting and potentially speed work for a athlete. Like let's just narrow it down to one sport. Like let's think football, American football versus sprinting for track, and that. And then even kind of there's been 3 phases of the sprint that I've been able to tie it down, or in my mind kind of categorize them as, and that have helped me a lot. And that's going to be, so you have acceleration mechanics, which are actually going to be a little bit different. So you highlighted top end. So like when I'm using those true form runners, our kids are demonstrating and practicing their top end speed mechanics. So that's going to be once somebody has accelerated completely, they're running at a full speed. How do they maintain that? What does that look like? So there's the acceleration, the transition, and the top end. And I would say for most of our field sport athletes, we live and breathe in acceleration, because most sports, other than like an occasional play for a wide receiver, a DB, or something gone wrong in football, like actually running full speed top end is very minimal. And number 2 is you have a ball in your arm at that point as well. So your arm swing is going to be a little bit different. So that's where it gets tricky, is when you get into track, like that becomes more of that true run. Like your athletes' demands are a little bit different. Like their job is literally, they are planning on running and they're going to be running full speed. So now you're kind of running into like, okay, now I have actual sprinters, track sprinters, and what's that supposed to look like? So I've spent a lot of time kind of breaking down slow motion videos of elite sprinters. And I think one thing that's important in the acceleration phase, like most of the best coaches I follow and the education I'm getting, they don't really worry about the arm swing as much in the acceleration phase. And it's more about, per se, like leaning with the torso and reaching with the arms. So the people that I like and what we found is less of a joint. So a more open joint angle is actually in the acceleration phase. Both the knee and the elbow is going to allow for like a greater lean and reach and a more powerful position. So like that kind of straight arm swing out in front of them with less elbow bend is pretty common in elite sprinters in the acceleration phase. So thinking like first 3 to 5 steps.
Yeah, and that was actually a conversation when we kind of brought that up. And it's funny when I kind of called him and like, bend your elbow, because it was like way back there. We're just doing some walking lunges, body weight with the elbows moving. He's like, yeah, I know I have that bad habit. And he commented, I think I picked it up by watching Andre DeGrasse do it in one of his runs. And I said, I'm like, I know it's not great, long term, but it's probably going to be okay, in that initial acceleration from the blocks where you kind of it's more about leaning and driving forward, right? You're not so much getting a lot of pull and twist from the arms. It's about getting forward as quick as possible. You can kind of use that arm to kind of almost leverage and kind of let your body weight fall with you.
Yeah, the coaching cues we use is we actually have them reach. They almost feel kind of dumb because they're reaching those arms out really in front. Because again, that's going to promote that forward torso lean and also get them long and extended. So allowing them to extend so they don't get crunched up in their position. So the acceleration phase it's a little bit different because there's a couple things you're looking for, and that's a low hill recovery. So like in the top end, that you're going to hit that figure 4 position. You want the hill kind of up by the butt, but in acceleration, you'll see kids almost drag the toe on the turf, which is a little excessive, but it's better than cycling that leg up high. So you really want to think about keeping that leg low to the ground and taking big, long steps. So almost like you're bounding out of the blocks or bounding out of your start. You're on the ground longer. You're pushing longer through the ground. Your big focus is pushing. So you're not worried about cycling quickly. You're just pushing as hard as you can, snapping that knee back up, keeping it low to the ground, and pushing again. So they're the big reach, the big straight arms. That actually is like probably that would be the advantageous position for him in the beginning. And then that's where you hit the transition, steps 5 through 7 to 8, and you start to become more upright. So your shin will be more vertical before your torso is all the way upright. So that's kind of your transition, is your body is still leaned forward, but now you're starting to see that shin's vertical. There's less horizontal displacement, and now it's all about hitting the ground and getting off the ground quickly and maintaining as much speed as you need. So you should create a majority of your acceleration in the first 5 to 7 steps. That's really where a lot of the speed is, and then it comes down to there's a little bit more acceleration, but really maintaining. So getting off the ground quickly, so your mindset changes from pushing down as hard as you can. Now I'm trying to be elastic, hit the ground, and then reset and get back up ready to do it again without losing any posture and position and without bleeding any speed. So they're kind of like two different mindsets, and that's where you're going to see more of what you're talking about with that 90-degree elbow. Because in my mind, it links, like, obviously your arm, like if you've ever done contralateral dead bugs, which you have with your kids, neuromuscular coordination, efficiency, that like how your body works. So when you are running and that's why I cue my kids to have a straight arm and acceleration, because I tend to find they kind of match the angles of their legs and their arms, right? So as you get into the top end, having that 90-degree elbow bend is really beneficial, because you can pump your arms faster, right? And we're looking for a higher cycle rate at the top. And then also you're going to see a matchup between that figure 4 position and the 90-degree elbow. Although I will say top sprinters, I still see a big reach back. So on their backswing, they're actually still straightening that arm rather than keeping it at 90 and getting that's going to help with their stride length. So you'll see a lot of good sprinters reach their arm back to straight and then come back through 90, if that makes sense. So they come back up to the ear with the 90. But when they reach back, they're not maintaining a 90 like sometimes is taught. That's what I'm seeing with most of these really great sprinters is they're reaching big. They're thinking big and big stride, because that arm, is linked to the leg. But I would say like the arm swing is probably the last thing I would really dial in on. I think getting the lower body mechanics typically starts to match up the arms on its own. So I would probably spend the least amount of time on arm swing in the beginning and focus on lower leg, hip, maintaining posture and position, what it feels like. All of that stuff I think is a little bit more important. But that's where the difference is. Ball athlete, or I get a basketball athlete, like arm swing really doesn't matter, because they're obviously using their arms, right? They're doing different things with their arms. And they're living in acceleration. Like basketball is lived and breathed in like a 3-step, 3 to 4 step, moving, getting horizontal, moving quickly. Like those guys don't really ever even open it up to like a full sprint, right?
No.
So arm swing for them is really non-existent. I mean, we get a ton of soccer kids that tend to have one arm that's tucked and one arm that swings based on dribbling a ball and defending a defender. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But hopefully that gives you like an idea, like with the track kids, the arm swing becomes more important for sure. Now, but any thoughts on that?
Let me hear you. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things, like talking about those phases of the sprint. That's been a big conversation just so far with the two of them, is the difference of power and speed. I talk this especially with my athletes that I train, in terms of thinking like a box jump. Speed being get to the box as fast as you can, which 90% of people do automatically, versus power being elevate your body as high as you can and land softly on top of the box. And with a lot of my athletes, when we start to do that, it's an absolute game changer, because then they learn how to create power and force and not just speed. Because speed's easy. You just move your body through space. You don't need to be strong to be to be fast, but you got to be strong and powerful, and vice versa.
Yeah, but you got to be strong and powerful to accelerate quickly, which
exactly.
And I would say 98% of sport, that is the big separating factor, right?
Totally.
It's not who's running the fastest at top end. It's like your best track kid's not going to necessarily be your best basketball player or your best football player.
Totally.
So I think that's where the misconception is, and that ties in. Like, we work on that all the time. We have to constantly remind our athletes, this hurdle is this high or this box is this high, but you're jumping as high as you can, right? To get as you're landing on the boxes with straight legs if possible. You're literally creating as much power as possible, and it's the same with our squatting, right? The compensatory acceleration training, right? It's like, hey, you can lift this weight slow, or you can dial it in, and it's mentally taxing, but you can move that bar as fast as you can and that's going to carry over to your training or to your sport a lot more than just grinding through reps, right?
Definitely.
So heavier isn't always better in that context, and that's something obviously that's not very well known in the training world, is like people just think bodybuilder equals athlete. So there's a huge disconnect there. So that's kind of where we've made a change, is making sure we really coach that. We've added in a ton of I call them just like mini collisions, mini impacts into our training, which all that is we're doing a ton of pogos, we're doing a ton of switches, we're doing a ton of sprint prep drills, getting like little bounces, getting the ankle complex stronger, the lower leg. And we've had 2 years ago, we had some shin splints, we didn't have any like extreme injuries, but we just had like some wear and tear, and knock on wood. But this year my dog just thought somebody knocked on the door. But literally, like, we haven't had any issues with that at all. We've had, like, it's been insane, the difference just by adding that into prep work every day. And then our athletes' ability to sprint, getting them into that 4 foot. I'd say a lot of kids reach with their heels. A lot of sprinters reach with their heels. We even went to a track meet this last weekend, and even some kids in their spikes are still heel striking. And I'm like, that's got to be painful. So getting kids to work with that 4 foot, strengthening the 4 foot, that typically gets them in a good position and allows them to be a little bit more explosive. But so those are kind of the things you kind of like, I was never aware of these little small things when it comes to speed and kind of connecting all the strength we were building to creating the athlete that can actually demonstrate that. So that's been the big difference for us. And that's like you said, get a kid in the 4 foot, and then all of a sudden they're running on the treadmill looks way better. Right. And the only difference was now in their mind, they're like, if you take shoes off of a kid, they automatically run in their 4 foot because they don't, it hurts to hit their heels.
Definitely.
So that act, like, you can just get a kid doing that for a little bit just to feel that. Is like, your brain knows. And as soon as you put on these padded shoes, it also knows you can get away with striking your heel, right? Yeah. So, that's kind of the link between all that. But I would say the arm swing, like with these sprinters, like, just to bring it back, it's like the long answer is it's going to look different in the acceleration versus the top end. Yeah. And he's probably like, I still think it's beneficial to have that big reach, even in the top end, like having that arm back and then back into a 90. I mean, everyone I've been watching that's fast does that. So there's got to be some kind of correlation.
I think as long as it's not overreaching too far, right? Because then it becomes a bit of a drag, and you got to really pull it back, right?
I think at any point, if they lose posture, like let's say like they reach so far back, it opens up their chest, and they're like kind of leaning back. Yeah. Then that's like the same as what we learned with the lifting. It's like posture and position rules all. So like there needs to be carryover from the way you lift to how you sprint. And then when you sprint, obviously if you're doing anything that's pulling you out of a stable trunk position, then you're losing the benefit of being able to drive aggressively through the ground and take that power and move it through the body. So
the last thought I have on the kind of arm swing, whether it's, doing just some high knee drills or whatever, or if it's doing some walking lunge or step ups, or trying to match that contralateral movement, especially for other athletes where it's not as important, especially if we're talking, like football or maybe rugby or even hockey, where it's not even a real sprint sport. It's kind of a different action. I think a big point for me is just the general coordination of the athlete to be able to do it properly. I think that's a big payoff, right? If someone doesn't know how to keep their elbow at 90 degrees and only move their shoulder, 15 degrees each direction, and they're doing like this huge, like 90 up, 100 back, and it's like they're all over the place. That's a big flag for me of like, this person's not very coordinated, and over time, that's probably going to take away from their overall athleticism. That might hold them back.
Yeah, 100%. So I would say the best way for coaches to, get past that and teach you, like, I would just say it's reps. So we've been giving our kids a ton of time running, way more time sprinting every day. Like, we have the kids for an hour. We have most athletes 2 times a week, and then we have kids that come 4 to 5. But we spend at an hour session, we spend the first 20 to 25 minutes on prep work and then sprint drills. So we'll do A skips, A marches, a lot of marching, bounding, running. We'll spend with our young kids, I'm really excited about the kids we have that are like between 8 to pre-middle school, because we're doing all these sprint. We're not lifting a lot of weights. We're lifting a little bit of weights, but we're doing a ton of just this, like, patterning is what I'd call it. Just letting them practice the patterns and teaching them how to run and doing these drills to where now when they get into, middle school, high school, they'll already be able to perform these at a higher level. And we can spend less time on that and more time on actually sprinting and moving fast and lifting more weights.
Yeah, I agree. Because if you can create those patterns early on, then those patterns stick around, right? And they develop their speed within those patterns, and then can develop bad habits. And they're at that age, they're not really going to gain a lot of strength, right? So it's good to get them lifting, but if they're going to really start weight training when they're 14, 15, that's when they're going to get the most strength, when they're starting to go through puberty, testosterone, hormones going through their system. I think that's a really good kind of balance in what the focus is with different age groups.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Like those kids are strength training is that same thing in mind. Patterning, teaching them a good squat pattern, teaching them how to do a push up, teaching them how to do, like, begin to understand how to do a pull up or do a pull up, ring rows. Like, it's all like basics, and it's even been worth it taking back these older kids and starting to, because they're making a lot of progress quickly. Like, if you would have came to our gym a year ago and everybody was doing like their switches and their dribbles and all that stuff, it was so bad. And now, like, you don't realize how good kids get until you have like a new kid come in.
Oh yeah,
and you're like, oh my gosh. So what's crazy is, like, that's why I do what I do, is because I didn't have these like, nobody was teaching. Like, we just expect everybody to know how to sprint in sports. Like, oh, you've played sports your whole life, right? Like, you know how to sprint. But then once you start to understand what it looks like and what it should look like, and you go to a high school game and you're like, none of these kids actually know how to run, and that's where you get the issues of people get shin splints. They end up running after sports is over in their life, and then they go get knee replacements, hip replacements. Like, there's a lot. These things, teaching people how to run, which people think should just be, I don't know, like, has there always been someone that taught people how to run like cavemen? Was there a guy that taught everybody how to run, or was it just because they were out running more barefoot? Like, totally, I don't know, but like, all I know is kids nowadays, like, they need to be taught how to run. Like, it's not absolutely something that's completely just natural and they're like running well just because they're a human. Like, there's a couple kids that come in that are, and maybe it'd be fun one day to do a bunch of research on these kids and see what their background is or whatnot. It tends to be like lighter kids that don't have to be very strong because they're small and they're light.
Yeah.
So I think
definitely
maybe
those
part of it,
those shorter, lighter kids. In my experience, just kind of thinking back to my childhood, those are kids that always were good at running. And honestly, I was one of the kids that got shin splints. Yeah. Mainly when I was probably like 15, 16, somewhere around there. I played hockey, right? And I was not a big kid. I was 5'8", maybe 5'9", maybe 80, 85 back then. So decent, got some weight on me. And, every time we did like any kind of length runs where it's like running, not sprinting, always got shin splints.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think, especially with, like, if you have a kid that's a little more genetically gifted, a little bigger, a little thicker, even if he is strong, like, there's a certain level of strength that's required to maintain these posture and positions and these things that need to be prerequisites A lot of kids aren't strong enough. And a lot of times it's not like people are thinking, oh, they're not strong enough, but my kid squats 300 pounds. It's like, no. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about their lower leg, foot, ankle, shins. Like,
can they do a single leg calf raise?
Yeah, all these things that don't necessarily pop into someone's head immediately. Though, like those little chinks in the armor is what takes down those big, strong kids. Like they got all these issues.
Well, and it's funny. So after I stopped playing hockey in junior, I went back to my old strength coach. He actually had a CrossFit gym, and I kind of got into that for obviously quite a long time now. And I can't remember how I got into it, but we talked about running or something. Maybe you saw me running. He's like, "You suck at running. Watch this video." And I dived into some of the pose running by Brian McKenzie. And the first run I did after that was like a 5K run in like New Balance minimal shoes, like no sole. Ran the whole thing on my toes.
Yeah.
My calves were destroyed, but I didn't have shin splints. And ever since then, I've never had shin splints since I started running more forefoot. Never had a shin splint.
Yeah, and you would think, oh, people just naturally do that, but they don't.
Not at all.
And there's a couple. We won't dive too far into this because this is all just like in my head. But there's a couple kids in my gym that I want to kind of do a little bit of testing on at the PT clinic, just because I have access to that on like a Biodex, and I want to see my fast kids and the kids that naturally are coming in running well, like what the quad to hamstring strength ratio is on both sides, and see like maybe these athletes are a little bit tight in the hamstring, because it seems to be like they're not very mobile on their hamstring, which is probably just like that's not ideal, but I think it's causing them to be a little bit more posterior chain focused, because they have to like pull back their leg as much.
It's funny. I'd probably say, I don't know if a number, but I definitely more than not of the young boys that I get in, like teenagers, like 13 plus, probably more than them than not, can't touch their toes.
Yeah, they're super
like
tight.
Not even close.
Yep. And some of my fastest ones are like the tight kids, which is because they've like, that's benefiting them to a degree, but it's a higher risk injury. So that's where it's like you'd rather have somebody mobile and strong and able to maintain the positions, but they're like getting away with like maintaining positions because naturally their body's tightened up. But again, like we said, that's a higher risk for injury. So there's but also a very real issue that can occur from that. So that's kind of like where my mind's starting to go. I'm going to do some research on it, and then depending on like follow up on that and get a couple kids in there and test them. And then if I find like it'll definitely influence some of my strength programming. If I find out like all these kids are way stronger in their hamstrings relative to their quads versus like other kids that are running weird and not doing it right. So it'd be interesting to see if like where we can tweak and fine tune the strength work to have a direct carryover to what we're working on.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah, so I'll keep you updated on that. But I think that answers the question. For other people to kind of dive into, we'll leave it just under 30 minutes, just so people can tend to listen to those episodes more. And then if we want to do a follow-up one on it,
for sure,
let's do it.
That sounds great.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for shooting that over. And I always appreciate a good question or two. So
yeah, thanks, Terrence. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to connect with you, and we'll have to catch up soon.
Sounds good, man.
See you, buddy.
Bye.